What if the people you trusted most walked away when you were on the edge of death? Benjamin Dunn woke to the quiet hum of his suburban home, sunlight cutting through the blinds in thin, precise lines. The house smelled faintly of stale air, a reminder it had been empty for days. He slowly swung his legs over the edge of the bed, every movement sending a sharp twinge through his chest, a lingering echo of the heart attack that had nearly taken him 2 weeks ago. Each step reminded him how close he had come to losing everything, and how coldly his own family had treated him when it mattered most. He moved to the kitchen with methodical care, filling the kettle with water. The familiar hiss of boiling reminded him of the routines that still tethered him to life. As he poured the tea, lukewarm though it was, Benjamin's mind wandered to the party his daughter had attended while he lay fighting for breath. The calls she never made, the promises she ignored. Years of sacrifice flashed through his mind, late nights at work, covering tuition, paying off debts, providing a life he never had, all seemingly unappreciated. The ringing of the doorbell was abrupt, sharp, almost demanding. Benjamin froze. His heart, though healing, skipped a beat, not from fear, but from recognition. He knew who it would be. Through the frosted glass, he could make out 2 familiar silhouettes, Agnes and her husband Martin. The intensity in their posture and their purposeful stride told him everything he needed to know. This visit was not born of concern. It was born of expectation, of entitlement. Benjamin straightened his back, adjusted his tie, and breathed deeply. The quiet of the house pressed in, and he remembered Victor's words. Family isn't just blood. Family is who shows up when you need them. But those who mattered most had failed. They had abandoned him when he was at his weakest, and now, standing outside his door, they expected him to forgive and comply. The knocking grew more aggressive, almost impatient. Benjamin felt the familiar adrenaline spike that came with confrontation, but he had survived worse. This wasn't fear, this was clarity. Every instinct, honed from decades as an engineer, told him to observe, calculate, and prepare. They believed vulnerability equaled weakness, but they would soon discover how wrong they were. He opened the door. Agnes barged past him, hair slightly disheveled, business suit wrinkled, eyes blazing. Martin followed closely, shoulders squared, attempting intimidation with his height. The house felt suddenly smaller, invaded, as if the walls themselves were recoiling from their audacity. "Dad, open up. We need to talk about the power of attorney," Agnes demanded, her voice sharp, impatient. Benjamin's hands tightened around the armrests of his chair, though he hadn't even sat yet. "We can talk," he said, calm, precise, "but I will not be threatened in my own home." Martin stepped forward, looming over him. "Old man, you don't understand what you're messing with. You need supervision." Benjamin's voice remained steady, like steel under pressure. "You mean control. You want access to what you didn't earn and took for granted." They flinched slightly, though neither admitted it. Benjamin observed, catalogued, and calculated. The house, once a sanctuary, felt violated, but he had learned patience and strategy over decades. He would not react impulsively. He would act decisively. And when this confrontation ended, they would realize that he was not the same man who had once been entirely at their mercy. As he gestured toward the living room, he thought to himself, "The battle is just beginning. And this time, I will win."
Sometimes the people closest to you are the first to weaponize your weaknesses. Benjamin guided Agnes and Martin into the living room with measured calm, watching their expression shift as the door closed behind them. He noticed every detail, the subtle twitch of Agnes's fingers, the tight jawline of Martin, the faint sheen of sweat on their foreheads. Every movement, every glance, every micro-expression was a clue, a thread he could unravel to see their true intentions. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs opposite him. "We can discuss this rationally." Agnes hesitated before lowering herself onto the couch, mascara-streaked cheeks betraying a nervousness she hadn't intended to show. Martin remained standing, hands clenched at his sides, as if preparing for battle. Benjamin allowed himself a small, controlled smile. They were reacting exactly as he had anticipated. "You've revoked the power of attorney," Martin said, his voice low but edged with threat. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I understand perfectly. I've also documented your behavior since my hospitalization. Every visit, every demand, every attempt to manipulate neighbors, banks, and local businesses. It's all here." He tapped the leather-bound notebook on the coffee table, a notebook filled with meticulous notes, times, dates, and observations that he had compiled since the heart attack. Agnes opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had prepared for confrontation, but she hadn't anticipated this level of preparation. Benjamin continued, ignoring her hesitation. "You have attempted to establish a pattern suggesting I am mentally incompetent. You have manipulated others to create a false narrative, hoping to regain control over my life and finances." Martin's face darkened. "That's ridiculous. You're being paranoid. Everyone is concerned about your well-being." Benjamin leaned forward slightly, eyes piercing. "Concerned or misled by your own lies? You believe that I am elderly and recovering from a heart attack, I will be easy to intimidate. You are wrong. I am fully aware of your actions, and I have evidence." Agnes finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Dad, we just wanted to help. We didn't know it was serious. We were concerned about you living alone." Benjamin held her gaze steadily. "Concern does not justify deception. You didn't come to check on me when it mattered. You didn't leave the party. And now you've tried to turn my community against me. That's not care. That's exploitation." He allowed a pause, letting the weight of his words sink in. Martin shifted uneasily, realizing that his usual tactics, intimidation, threats, manipulation, were failing against someone who had anticipated them. Benjamin had turned their own strategy against them by simply observing, documenting, and preparing.
"From this point forward," Benjamin continued, voice calm but firm, "I make all decisions regarding my finances, my estate, and my personal life. Attempts to interfere, intimidate, or manipulate will have consequences. You have been warned." Agnes's shoulders slumped and she bit her lip. Martin's fists unclenched slowly, but his eyes still held defiance. Benjamin knew they weren't defeated yet, but he had gained the upper hand. They had underestimated him, thinking his vulnerability would allow them to seize control. Instead, he had turned clarity and preparation into a weapon more powerful than any argument or threat. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, letting the afternoon light illuminate his composed expression. "This house, my life, my decisions, they are mine. If you wish to challenge me, you will have to face the full consequences of your actions. But make no mistake, I am prepared for whatever comes next." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then slowly, Agnes rose, tears brimming in her eyes. "Dad, I just—" "You just what?" Benjamin asked softly, almost pityingly. "Regret? Fear? The realization that abandoning me has consequences?" She couldn't answer. Martin's jaw tightened and he stepped closer, but Benjamin didn't flinch. His hands rested calmly on his lap, steady and unshakable, a signal of unyielding control. He had survived a life-threatening heart attack and the betrayal of his own family. Now he faced their desperation with the same engineering precision he had applied to every project, every calculation, every blueprint of his life. "This isn't over," Martin muttered, a warning disguised as a threat. Benjamin smiled faintly. "Oh, it's over, for now. But the consequences are only beginning to unfold, and you will learn what it truly means to underestimate me." As the two left, the air seemed to shift, heavy with unspoken tension and impending conflict. Benjamin sat back, finally allowing himself a slow, deep breath. The war had begun, not in anger, not in shouting, but in strategy, preparation, and unwavering resolve. And he intended to win.
When betrayal comes from within your own home, preparation becomes your strongest weapon. Benjamin sat alone in his study, the fading afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. The encounter with Agnes and Martin replayed in his mind like a film. Every word, every gesture, every subtle attempt at intimidation. He knew that their threats were serious. They weren't empty, they were calculated. And now he had to act. He opened his notebook and began reviewing his documentation again. Each note was precise: dates, times, interactions, and the subtle patterns of manipulation. There were the whispered comments to neighbors questioning his decisions, the inquiries at the bank about his supposed forgetfulness, even the casual remarks to local shopkeepers suggesting he might be making impulsive financial choices. "Pattern established," Benjamin muttered to himself. "Pattern of cognitive decline. That's their strategy. Guardianship, financial control, legal leverage." He paused and leaned back in his chair, letting the gravity of the situation settle over him. They had underestimated him, but they hadn't realized he'd spent his entire career as an engineer building structures to withstand pressure, stress, and time. This was just another structure, but this time the stakes were personal. Benjamin began outlining a counter-strategy, a defensive blueprint to protect his independence. First, he would fortify his legal standing. Second, he would alert his trusted circle, friends, neighbors, professionals, to observe the situation and report any further manipulations. Third, he would secure his assets and finances, ensuring that no sudden action could be taken against him without clear evidence of malfeasance. The next morning, Benjamin called Thompson and Associates. "I need to accelerate my will modification. I can't wait. Their threats are escalating." The receptionist, familiar with Benjamin's calm but determined voice, arranged the earliest possible appointment. He knew that speed was essential. By noon, Benjamin was at the firm, entering a room bathed in soft light. Attorney James Mitchell greeted him with a professional smile. "Mr. Dunn, good to see you. Let's review your options and ensure your decisions are legally sound." Benjamin laid out his case. "I need to ensure that any attempt to challenge my mental competency fails. I've documented 3 weeks of manipulative behavior, attempts to involve neighbors, banks, and businesses. I need a will that is ironclad." Mitchell reviewed the notes, nodding thoughtfully. "This is thorough. We can create language that will prevent a competency challenge. It will be clear, formal, and legally robust." Over the next hour, they drafted a document that left nothing to chance. Every asset, every account, every property would go to the American Heart Association. Agnes and Martin would receive precisely $1 each, a symbolic gesture to demonstrate he hadn't forgotten them, but also to remove any expectation of inheritance.
Language emphasizing his sound mind and free will would fortify the document against future legal challenges. Once the will was prepared, Benjamin carefully reviewed it, making sure each clause reflected his intentions with absolute clarity. Witnesses from the firm were present, providing independent verification of his mental state. He signed with hands steady from decades of precision work, each letter deliberate, each stroke confident. As he left the office, Benjamin felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in months. The legal fortress was in place, but he knew the battle was far from over. Agnes and Martin were desperate. Their next moves were unpredictable. But now he had control, and he would use it. Back home, he made a cup of tea, savoring the ritual as he reflected on the day's work. He could feel their panic even from miles away. He imagined them at home, realizing that the inheritance they had counted on was gone, replaced by legal safeguards that would protect his autonomy. The thought brought a measured satisfaction, not vengeance, just justice, carefully engineered. Benjamin glanced at the clock. Agnes and Martin would arrive eventually. Their confrontation was inevitable. But for the first time since his hospitalization, he felt ready to face the storm with calm precision, prepared for every argument, every threat, every attempt to undermine him. And for the first time, he allowed himself a small, private smile. This was no longer just survival. It was strategy. Because when betrayal comes from within your own home, the only defense is preparation. And Benjamin Dunn had become a master of it.
Sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought not on battlefields, but at your own front door. The following afternoon, Benjamin settled into his reading chair, the sunlight casting golden streaks across the floor. He sipped his tea slowly, every detail of the past few weeks etched in his mind. His phone rang sharply, breaking the calm. He let it ring, knowing exactly who it was. Agnes. "Dad, are you feeling better?" Her voice carried the practiced tone of concern, but Benjamin had learned to hear the layers beneath words. "I'm well, thank you," he replied evenly, placing the cup on the side table. "I'm calling about something important." There was a pause. "What is it?" she asked, curiosity edging into anxiety. "I've changed my will," Benjamin said, each word measured. "When I pass, you and Martin will receive nothing. Everything goes to the American Heart Association. You'll each get $1, just enough to prove I haven't forgotten you." The silence on the other end was palpable, followed by the faint sound of Martin's voice in the background. "Benjamin, you can't be serious." "Completely serious," Benjamin replied, the calm in his voice masking the storm he anticipated outside his front door. By the time Agnes and Martin arrived, he had poured himself another cup of tea. They rang the bell with the same aggressive urgency as before, but this time, Benjamin held all the power. Agnes burst through the door, hair slightly disheveled, suit wrinkled, a stark contrast to her usual polished appearance. Martin followed, trying to use his usual intimidation, but their posture had shifted. They were smaller, less confident. "Dad, please tell me this is a joke," Agnes began, desperation threading her words. "No joke," Benjamin replied firmly. "Legal documents don't have punchlines." Martin attempted his typical bluff, stepping close. "Old man, you don't know what you're doing. This affects more than just us." Benjamin's gaze didn't waver. "Really? Who else does it affect?" Martin faltered, his incomplete sentence revealing the truth he hadn't intended to share, their complete financial dependence on Benjamin. Agnes sank into the couch, hands shaking. "Daddy, I made mistakes, I know I did, but cutting me out entirely—" Benjamin's voice was steady, calm. "The father who would have tolerated neglect and abuse died at Northwestern Memorial. I'm someone different now. We can work through this, but the past has consequences." Agnes's voice dropped to a pleading whisper. "I'll be better, more attentive. I'll call every day." Benjamin held her gaze. "Agnes, where were you on April 14th when I was dying?" She froze. I know," he continued. "Dr. Ellis told me everything. You couldn't leave Martin's birthday party, and you didn't visit me despite my condition. You chose convenience over family." Martin's face darkened. "That doctor violated patient confidentiality." Benjamin's response was measured, almost clinical. "Not when it's the truth. Sometimes honesty is inconvenient, but necessary." Agnes began crying, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "I was wrong. I made a terrible mistake, but you can't punish me for life." Benjamin leaned back in his chair, calm, almost gentle. "I'm not punishing you for life. I'm punishing you for the consequences of your choices. Now you know what it feels like to be abandoned in your darkest hour." Martin, desperate, tried another angle. "You think you're smart, but you're just a bitter old man dying alone." Benjamin's eyes didn't leave theirs. "Better alone than surrounded by people who see me as an ATM." Agnes and Martin left, slamming the door with more force than before. Benjamin locked it behind them, returning to his reading chair. The house was peaceful, but the war was far from over. They would challenge the will. They would attempt to prove incompetency. They would plot. But Benjamin had prepared. Every move, every threat, every argument had been anticipated. He had built a legal and strategic fortress, one that could withstand their attacks. As the evening settled over Chicago, Benjamin sipped his tea, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. Somewhere out there, Agnes and Martin were plotting their next move. But in his own home, surrounded by the life he had built with his own hands, he was exactly where he belonged. And for the first time since the heart attack, he felt fully in control.
When greed meets desperation, even family becomes the enemy, and the courtroom becomes the battlefield. The following morning, Benjamin's phone buzzed with alerts from Thompson & Associates. The firm had already begun preparing for the inevitable. Agnes and Martin wouldn't accept being cut out so easily. He leaned back in his chair, letting the sunlight fall on the meticulously organized notebook where he had documented every incident since his heart attack. Each note, every phone call, every threat, and every manipulated neighbor's statement would serve as ammunition in the coming legal storm. Benjamin understood something crucial. This wouldn't be a simple contest of wills. This was a war of narratives, where perception could be as lethal as the law itself. Agnes and Martin had already planted seeds of doubt among neighbors and local businesses, implying that his recent heart attack had left him mentally unstable. Their goal was clear: establish a pattern of cognitive decline to gain guardianship over him and regain access to his finances. He poured himself a cup of tea, the aroma calming his nerves, before dialing Janet Chan at Chase Bank. "Janet, I want additional security measures for my accounts. No access without notarized approval from my lawyer. Every transaction must be verified." "Of course, Mr. Dunn. I'll implement them immediately." Satisfied, Benjamin moved to his computer, drafting letters to neighbors and local businesses he had long-standing relationships with. Each letter was carefully worded, a brief note explaining that any inquiries about his decision-making or finances should be directed only to his attorney. No gossip, no misstatements, no misleading statements.
He could almost hear Agnes and Martin's frustration building already. By the afternoon, Benjamin had arranged a meeting with his lawyer, James Mitchell, to discuss contingencies for a potential guardianship challenge. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and leather, comforting in its familiarity. Mitchell, ever the seasoned legal strategist, spread a series of documents across the table. "Benjamin, they are prepared. Agnes and Martin have been collecting statements, talking to neighbors, and possibly contacting your doctors under the guise of concern. They're trying to build a narrative that your heart attack impaired your judgment. I anticipated as much. Every conversation, every note, every visit, they've revealed themselves." Mitchell studied his client carefully. "The key is documentation and witnesses. Your meticulous records will speak louder than their accusations. We will also file affidavits from those who can attest to your mental clarity and capacity to make decisions. Affidavits from neighbors, local business owners, even the barista at Brewster's Coffee. They know me. They know I am the same Benjamin Dunn who managed engineering projects, calculated precise structures, and maintained my life independently." Mitchell smiled. "Exactly. You are an engineer, Benjamin. You understand structure, stability, and foresight. That mindset will carry over into your legal strategy. We'll show the court that you are fully capable of managing your affairs." The day blurred into careful preparation. Benjamin contacted individuals who could provide sworn statements about his decision-making, documenting each call and follow-up meticulously. By evening, he leaned back in his chair, exhausted but resolute. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about preserving his independence, his dignity, and his right to define the consequences of his daughter's choices. 2 days later, the legal notice arrived. Agnes and Martin had filed preliminary papers contesting the will, alleging that Benjamin's judgment had been impaired by his heart attack. Their claims were broad and intentionally vague, designed to provoke doubt and hesitation. Benjamin read the document carefully, pen in hand, making annotations in the margins. Every assertion they made, every insinuation would be countered with hard evidence, notes, witnesses, and documentation. He picked up his notebook, reading through entries that detailed the systematic campaign against him. His heart, though still tender from the attack, beat steadily. Each plan, each threat, each attempt to manipulate others had been recorded. Nothing could be fabricated now. Every move they had made was visible, undeniable. Benjamin's mind, always the engineer's mind, began calculating sequences. Step by step, he would dismantle their challenge. Each lie would be met with documented fact. Each insinuation countered with witness testimony. Each attempt to intimidate neutral parties thwarted by careful communication and legal measures. By the time night fell, Benjamin felt a quiet satisfaction. The storm was coming, yes, but he had built a structure to withstand it. He poured himself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the city lights blink to life across Chicago. Somewhere, Agnes and Martin were planning, calculating, hoping to find a flaw in his strategy. But Benjamin had engineered this outcome carefully. For 40 years, he had built structures that could endure pressure, weather, and time. Now he would build one final structure, a legal fortress around his life, his independence, and his choices. As darkness settled over the city, Benjamin closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of the past weeks wash over him. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin.
In the courtroom, truth is tested, lies are magnified, and the strongest will must prove their clarity under fire. The morning air in Chicago felt sharp as Benjamin walked into the Cook County Probate Court. His suit was perfectly pressed, shoes polished, hands steady. Every step was deliberate, a quiet declaration. He was not the frail, confused man Agnes and Martin had tried to portray. He carried only his notebook,
a copy of the notarized will, and a composed mind honed from years of engineering and meticulous planning. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was formal but tense. Legal assistants whispered quietly in corners, while judges and clerks shuffled papers. Benjamin recognized faces, some familiar from his long life in the community, but today all attention would focus on him. This was no ordinary hearing. His daughter and son-in-law had launched a full-scale assault on his independence, and he was prepared to meet it head-on. As the judge entered, Benjamin's heart raced, not with fear, but with controlled anticipation. He had rehearsed his statements, prepared every witness, and anticipated every angle Agnes and Martin might take. The judge's gavel struck the sound block, echoing through the room. Silence followed. "Mr. Dunn," the judge began, "we are here to review the claims regarding your mental competency and the contested will you recently executed. You may proceed." Benjamin stood, placing his notebook carefully on the table. "Your Honor, I am Benjamin Dunn. I am fully competent, sound of mind, and exercising my free will. The actions of my daughter and son-in-law have necessitated this proceeding. I will demonstrate, with documented evidence, witness testimony, and my own account, that their claims are baseless." The opposing attorney, representing Agnes and Martin, arose immediately. "Your Honor, we contend that Mr. Dunn's judgment has been compromised by recent medical events. Following a serious heart attack, he has made decisions without full understanding of consequences, including revoking his will and changing beneficiaries." Benjamin remained composed. He had anticipated this exact framing. "If it pleases the court," he said calmly, "I have compiled a 3-week record detailing every interaction, threat, and attempt by my daughter and son-in-law to manipulate my neighbors, my financial institutions, and community contacts. Each entry is dated, witnessed where possible, and verifiable." A murmur ran through the courtroom as he laid out his meticulously documented notebook. He presented affidavits from neighbors, local business owners, and even Brewster, the coffee shop owner, confirming Benjamin's mental clarity, awareness, and rational decision-making. The attorney for Agnes and Martin shifted uncomfortably. "These are anecdotal reports, Your Honor. They do not replace professional evaluation or cognitive testing." Benjamin anticipated this, too. He had already secured a statement from Dr. Ellis, his cardiologist, confirming his mental competence post-heart attack. Dr. Ellis's note described his cognitive state as fully capable of making informed, rational decisions. As the hearing progressed, Benjamin spoke with the calm precision of an engineer laying out a blueprint. "Your Honor, this is not about money or emotional disputes or misunderstanding. This is about a deliberate, documented attempt to portray a competent adult as incapable in order to gain access to funds and control over my estate. Every attempt by my daughter and son-in-law has been logged and verified." Agnes sat, her posture rigid, mascara streaked from restless nights of plotting, while Martin shifted nervously. His attorney tried to interject, claiming emotional distress and perceived neglect during Benjamin's hospitalization. Benjamin countered with careful wording. "Emotional distress is understandable," he said, voice steady, "but it does not constitute evidence of my incompetency. Their absence during my critical health events, refusal to visit, and the manipulative behaviors following my recovery clearly demonstrate self-interest, not concern." By late afternoon, witnesses had been heard, affidavits submitted, and Benjamin had presented every piece of evidence. The courtroom, which had begun tense and skeptical, now leaned in. His meticulous preparation, calm demeanor, and clear documentation left no room for doubt.
Even the opposing counsel struggled to maintain credibility under such thorough presentation. As the judge adjourned the hearing for review, Benjamin sat quietly, notebook closed, hands folded. The tension of weeks, the fear of being stripped of independence, all seemed to lift slightly. He knew the verdict could still take days, but he knew the foundation he had built was solid, engineered to withstand scrutiny, manipulation, and greed. Walking out of the courthouse, the city felt different. The wind off Lake Michigan seemed less biting, the streets quieter. For the first time in weeks, Benjamin allowed himself a moment of relief. He had faced the first round, presented the truth, and now the law itself would act as an impartial force against the selfishness of his own blood. That evening, back in his home, Benjamin sat by the window, notebook on his lap, tea in hand. He thought about Victor's words. Family isn't just blood. Family is who shows up when you need them. His daughter and son-in-law had abandoned him, but the truth and his own resolve were on his side. Somewhere in the city, Agnes and Martin were regrouping, plotting their next move. But Benjamin had learned something vital. No amount of manipulation could overcome meticulous planning, documented evidence, and a calm, rational mind. The battle was far from over, but Benjamin knew he had regained control, not just of his estate, but of the story of his own life.
Sometimes, the quietest moments are the most dangerous. They give your enemies time to plan, but also give you the chance to prepare. The day after the courtroom hearing, Benjamin returned to his home with a sense of cautious relief. The hearing had gone better than expected. His notes, witnesses, and Dr. Ellis's affidavit had left little room for doubt, yet he knew the battle was far from over. Agnes and Martin were relentless, and their desperation had only grown since discovering the extent of his precautions. Sitting in his favorite armchair, Benjamin took stock of his situation. The living room, where just weeks ago they had barged in, demanding control over his finances, now felt like a fortress. Every corner of the room, every item carefully placed, symbolized years of hard work and independence. He poured himself a cup of tea, the steam curling like a gentle warning to anyone who might try to invade this sanctuary again. Benjamin opened his notebook, reviewing his documentation one more time. Every threat, every attempt to manipulate neighbors, and every confirmed witness account, it was all recorded meticulously. Notes were color-coded, red for threats, yellow for attempts to manipulate neighbors, and green for confirmed witness accounts. This was not paranoia, it was preparation. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Victor. "How's my favorite passenger doing?" he said with a gruff laugh. Benjamin smiled, holding steady. "Court went well yesterday. I have them cornered, but I know it's far from over." Victor's tone softened. "Good. Keep your head. They'll try to rattle you, push buttons, make you doubt yourself. That's when you stay calm and remember the facts. You've already won half the battle with that notebook of yours." Benjamin appreciated the support. Victor had become an unexpected anchor in his life, a reminder that not all family was defined by blood. "Thanks, Victor. I needed to hear that. I feel ready for whatever they throw at me next." By evening, the quiet of the house was punctuated only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional passing car. Benjamin reflected on the confrontation from weeks ago. Agnes rushing past me, Martin cowering with intimidation, the threats about incompetency. Those memories were sharp, but now they served a different purpose. They were evidence, reminders of why he had acted decisively. He checked his mailbox and found a letter from the probate court. It confirmed that the judge had received all submitted documentation and would issue a preliminary review before scheduling the next hearing. Benjamin felt a flicker of satisfaction. The wheels of justice moved slowly, but methodically, and now they were aligned with him. As night fell, Benjamin's thoughts turned inward. He knew Agnes and Martin would not simply accept the situation. They would attempt everything possible: coercion, legal maneuvers, and possibly even attempts to sway neighbors or professionals to their side. But Benjamin had built his defenses carefully. He had witnesses, notarized documentation, and a solid legal team. The structure he had created was designed to withstand pressure, greed, and manipulation. That night, he updated his notebook with new entries, phone calls, letters, and interactions he had observed in the days following the hearing. Every action taken by Agnes and Martin was logged with precise timestamps. Benjamin understood the importance of proving patterns, of establishing the deliberate nature of their campaign. Around midnight, Benjamin sat by the window, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the dark waters of Lake Michigan. The city seemed peaceful, unaware of the storm brewing within one quiet suburban street. He thought about the lessons Victor had shared. Family isn't just blood. Family is who shows up when you need them. He had seen the absence of true family in Agnes and Martin, but he had also seen the presence of real support in friends, professionals, and those who truly cared. As he prepared for bed, Benjamin felt a mixture of anticipation and resolve. The next steps would be critical. Agnes and Martin were desperate, and desperation could make people reckless. He needed to anticipate every move, plan every response, and stay several steps ahead. With a final glance at his organized living room and the notebook resting on the side table, he allowed himself a moment of quiet. Tomorrow would bring another chapter in this battle, another test of his clarity, strength, and preparation. But for now, in the stillness of his home, he felt a renewed sense of control. He turned off the lights, confident that while the storm was approaching, he had built a house that could withstand it, and he would be the one standing when it passed.
In the game of family and greed, sometimes the last move decides everything, and the stakes are higher than life itself. The next morning, Benjamin awoke before sunrise. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt charged with potential. Today was the day he would cement the final layer of protection around his life, finances, and independence. He reviewed his plan one last time. Every phone call, every letter, every witness statement was mapped out meticulously. Agnes and Martin had underestimated him, and now he intended to show them just how costly their ambitions could become. He brewed a fresh pot of Earl Grey and sat by the window, watching the first rays of sunlight reflect off Lake Michigan. The city was stirring, oblivious to the storm about to erupt in a single suburban street. His legal team, Thompson and Associates, would arrive by 10 to discuss additional protective measures, power of attorney locks, updated security on his accounts, and preemptive notices to the probate court to guard against any surprise filings. At precisely 9:45 a.m., the doorbell rang. It wasn't Agnes or Martin, it was Victor. He stepped inside, carrying a briefcase and a small thermos of coffee. "Thought you might need backup," he said, with a grin. Benjamin appreciated the gesture. Even in the legal battlefield, having a trusted friend present was reassuring. By 10, James Mitchell and his associates were seated around the polished mahogany table. Benjamin laid out his documentation, phone logs, neighborhood witness statements, bank communications, and notes from his personal observations. The team went over every detail, confirming that the upcoming challenges from Agnes and Martin could be countered decisively. Mitchell looked up, meeting Benjamin's gaze. "Your documentation is exceptional. We can file preemptive notices to the court, ensuring any claims about incompetency are addressed immediately. Your daughter and son-in-law are out of legal leverage." Benjamin nodded. "Good. Let's move quickly." By late morning, notices were sent. The probate court acknowledged receipt, and Benjamin personally confirmed that copies had gone to all relevant financial institutions. Each action sent a subtle but clear message. The house, the estate, and his independence were no longer negotiable. Around noon, Benjamin returned home to find the street unusually quiet. He poured himself another cup of tea and settled into his reading chair, scanning the afternoon newspaper to maintain a sense of normalcy.
But tranquility was fleeting. At 12:17 p.m., the familiar aggressive ring of the doorbell echoed through the house. Agnes and Martin were back. Their expressions, however, were different this time. Desperation mingled with calculated anger. Benjamin remained seated, calm, his notebook and tea at hand. "Dad, this isn't over," Agnes said, her voice sharper than before. Martin's stance was imposing, but it carried a tremor of uncertainty. Benjamin smiled faintly. "I've anticipated your moves. You'll find the game has changed." Agnes dropped into the couch, her hands trembling. "Please, we can work this out. You can't just cut us out entirely." Benjamin leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not punishing you for life. I'm setting boundaries. You learned nothing when I was at my lowest. Now you're learning consequences." Martin stepped closer, voice low and threatening. "You think legal documents will stop us? We'll find a way." Benjamin shook his head. "Without access to my accounts, without inheritance, your options are limited. Everything is secured and every move is documented. The court knows exactly what you've done." Agnes began crying again, mascara streaking down her face. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have abandoned you. We'll be better, I promise. We'll call, visit, everything." Benjamin's voice softened slightly, but his tone remained unwavering. "You will be better, not because I forgive you automatically, but because you face the consequences of your actions. You had the chance to show up when it mattered most, and you didn't. And that's why they, and not you, matter now." With that, he opened the door wide. Martin and Agnes stepped back, their power finally diminished. They left in silence, their departure a mixture of rage, confusion, and reluctant acceptance. Benjamin closed the door, locked it, and exhaled. The storm had passed, for now. Sitting back in his armchair, Benjamin reflected on the past weeks. He had faced betrayal, intimidation, and attempts to strip him of his dignity and independence. Yet he had emerged not only intact, but stronger, with clarity on who truly belonged in his life. Victor's words echoed once more. Family is who shows up when you need them. As the Chicago evening settled outside his window, Benjamin felt a profound sense of peace. He had protected what mattered most, not money, not property, but his autonomy, his legacy, and the right to define his own life. Agnes and Martin had learned the hard way that neglect, greed, and manipulation carry consequences. Benjamin poured one final cup of tea, savoring the warmth, the quiet, and the knowledge that he had engineered a future free from exploitation. He was no longer a victim of circumstance, and for the first time in decades, he could truly live for himself. The city lights twinkled on the lake, reflecting a life reclaimed, a home defended, and a man who had faced the storm and emerged victorious.